the first 100, let you be the get the service of your choice.
Thank you.
You have a very brilliant academic career. You are the gold medalist in the graduation.
Yes.
Uh, Let me start from this with a brilliant career and all those things which you have mentioned. Why you want to join IAS or the civil service?
So while I was doing my graduation from 11th and 12th, my understanding was evolving. So I took forensic science out of interest. And then when I was in my graduation, I was interning with the forensic science laboratory, and I had the opportunity to train police personnel in forensic science in Maharashtra Police. And that's when I realized that it gave a lot more happiness when I could see that what I'm doing has much more impact than what I'm doing in a lab. So then I was looking at alternate opportunities with a career in which I'll have some role in with people, and I'll have the power to empower people. Came to know about civil services, and I read a bit about it, and I thought that I should attempt it seriously because I felt that it gives one a learning opportunity throughout life because of the diversity of people, and the kind of public interaction that it gives for people is much more than any other profession that India has to offer, which is why I wanted to pursue civil services as a career.
Okay. Uh, just of course, let's do the interview first. I'll tell you how you put across the same things because this is something which already has been asked for. So you should be 100% sure that the answer which you will be giving now would be the one which is acceptable to all. Here, we will moderate it once the interview is over. Secondly, how your qualifications of forensic science can be useful in the civil service?
In police services, there is a direct impact because I can empower other police personnel to focus on forensic science, which will have a direct impact. In other civil services, there is no direct impact of forensic science, but there are a few skill sets that we've developed over the course of time in forensic science. For example, always having evidence-based writings and always looking out for details and a scientific temperament. So all of this will help me in the other administrative arena as well.
Sama.
Hi, Karishma. Am I audible? I'm audible,
Yes.
no?
Yes.
Karishma, what is para diplomacy?
So, other than national government, the state governments also undertake diplomacy with other countries. And when such form of diplomacy takes place, when it's not on a national level but sub-national level, it's known as para diplomacy.
Can you cite me 2 examples?
So, for example, when Kerala floods were taking place, the reaching out to other countries and the diaspora there, and using their diplomatic route of UAE and all to help overcome the flood challenge was an example of para diplomacy. So. And the many states, for example, Maharashtra undertakes the Invest Maharashtra program, in which they try and attract foreign players, and then they try and use their diplomatic tools to get investment. So all of this is a form of para diplomacy.
Administration is administration, nothing public about it. Do you remember this statement? Who said it?
Sir, I do not recall who said it exactly.
Okay. Can you tell me something about prismatic society?
So the concept was given by F.W. Riggs, in which he mentioned that prismatic society is a society where there are characteristics of both a developed society as well as a non-developed society, and both of them coexist at the same time. So he gave certain examples of, say, Thailand, which is an example, and we could consider India also an example of a prismatic society, wherein we have multiple institutions and they are modern institutions, but then there are a few things that happen in the country which are not really rational or not really formal. And for example, sir, there is a term he had given called formalism. wherein there are rules given and there are rules in place, but what actually happens need not take place according to rules. For example, bribery is an example of such formalism in rules.
Okay, when within prismatic society, Riggs says that, show me the man, I show you the law. If you remember the bazaar canteen model, you show me the customer, I show you the price. Do you think in the administrative arena also the same thing is happening? That is, laws are implemented differently for different people.
So while Riggs in his assessment mentioned and gave examples of such behavior, and we have seen over the course of time when rules are mended to boost corruption, such things do take place. However, sir, I think in the recent times with the push for e-governance and a push for faceless administration and things like that, we are trying to ensure that the rules are the same for everybody, and such a tool of showing the rules to a particular person is not followed and rule of law is implemented, sir. So while there are instances of this, but I think we are understanding that this is a problem and looking for solutions, sir.
Do you know hit and run cases?
Yes, sir. In accidents, when the perpetrator does not stop to help
Has
the
anything
people with
recently
this hit and
happened?
run case.
Has anything recently happened where the Honorable Supreme Court has somehow showed that the bazaar canteen model is not implemented in India? Do you think some sort of that thing has happened in the recent past, maybe in last 3-4 days?
I'm sorry, sir. I'm not able to
Okay,
recollect anything.
that's
Sir, if
completely
you
okay.
give me a direction, I. Thanks.
Okay, okay. You know there are a few criteria for a language to be declared as classical language.
Yes, sir.
Do you know those criteria?
So there are three criteria given. The first one is that the language should be around 2000 years old. There should be a written script, and it is not necessary that the same thing has to be continued, but there should be a rich literature present of that language. And so there is one more condition which I am not aware. I am not able to recall at present.
So that's fine, Karishma. Karishma, you hail from Kerala, right?
Yes.
And you have lived your almost till date life at Maharashtra,
Yes.
right? So can you argue a case wherein Marathi should be declared a classical language? Because Malayalam is one, right?
Yes.
So do you think Marathi should be declared a classical language? Because it is also very old. It has its own grammar, own literature, right?
Yes, sir. Sir, this contention is actually sub judice because Marathi to be declared as a official language is now in court, and I believe, sir, it should be declared as a classical language because, as you've mentioned, it is quite old, and the literary richness in the form of even the bhakti in the bhakti movement, we've seen that there are multiple poetries of that era in Marathi, from Yaneshwari and so on, and the plays, even now there are many Marathi plays, and the richness in the poetry and plays, although I myself have not read many of it, but I am aware that it showcases a vast richness, sir. And it has also, even on the national scale, it has won many awards. Many Jnanpith awards are won by Marathi writers as well, sir. So because of all these reasons, I think considering it as a culture, as a cultural language will definitely give a boost to the study of Marathi, and also to do more research on why it should be a classical language, sir. So I think it is a positive step, sir.
Okay. So I see you have very closely worked with Parliament.
Yes.
So Venkaiah Naidu, you know who Venkaiah Naidu is? He
Yes,
keeps
sir.
on telling there are 3 Ds in the Parliament and the 4th D is coming in between. Do you know what are those 3 Ds and what is the 4th D which is intervening?
So debate, discussion, and I'm not able to recall the third D, but I think disruption is the fourth D that is entering the discourse.
Nice, nice. So the third one is deliberation. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah. So you have also worked in public policy arena, right?
Yes.
Can you tell me the difference between incrementalism and rational model of public policy?
The incremental model was given by Lindblom, in which he mentioned that no policy starts from scratch. Every policy is built up on policy that has already been developed previously. He gives examples also. For example, the budget. Every year, we just incrementally add amounts in budget. And he's given reasons for this also, because already resources are invested in a particular public policy, and there are time constraints and knowledge constraints. And these are the reasons why no policy is entirely rational. On the other hand, the rational model says that having incremental policy changes will not bring any change or development. We should have a rational model wherein all pros and cons are assessed of a particular public policy, and public policy is chosen because it is the best from all rationality, from all alternatives possible. And I'm not sure who has given it, but both of them are in two different arenas of the spectrum. And now I think we follow middle path, sir, wherein if we see we follow incrementalism to some extent, but we also bring in policies which are dramatically different from other policies as well. So some middle ground is what is followed usually, sir.
So Herbert Simon gave the rational
Rational model.
model.
Yes.
Okay, radical rational model.
Yes.
Okay. Dhananjay sir, please
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay. So you have written that you worked for public policy and research internship. Can you explain me public policy cycle?
So the very first stage of public policy cycle is agenda setting, wherein we need to know what is the agenda for which policy is made. Again, for this process, there are multiple stakeholders involved, like we can involve citizens and institutions, and agenda is set. After that, there is policy formulation, which includes finding out alternatives and also selecting which one should be followed. After policy formulation, policy implementation takes place, and simultaneously policy monitoring also takes place, wherein any challenges that a policy faces should be noted down, so that post legislative scrutiny is also taking place in this step. After that, the very important step which we sometimes miss is the policy evaluation, wherein we have to see if what the policy intended to achieve, has it been achieved, or could it have been achieved in a better way. And then the cycle goes back to agenda setting, as in after the evaluation we find out, is there any modification to be taking place. So to give an example, in the GST, once we developed the policy, we came to know that traffic-eering was happening and profiteering was happening, sorry, and which is why we had to change the laws and bring in an anti-profiteering law within the GST's ambit. So this cycle is a healthy cycle in which we can modify policies so that it fulfills its intended objectives.
Okay, so what are the various tools available to evaluate any scheme of the government or any program of the government?
Sir, in for tools, dashboards are the present mechanisms in which they can evaluate, wherein we find out what is our performance indicators, and we find out what are the KRAs that we find, the results that are coming, and then through the dashboard we can find out that
Dashboard is not the tools. Dashboard is where we are putting all our agendas and then we are monitoring everything. Okay, forget.
I'm sorry, sir, I'll have to read on the tools.
Yes. Tell me the three major public policy issues in India. Policy issues in India.
So, firstly, safety of women is a policy issue which we have not been able to tackle in a really long time.
I think you're not understanding my question. I'm asking about policy issues.
The issues in policy making is.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't understand.
No issue.
So, firstly.
Okay,
sorry.
Please continue.
So, firstly, the citizen engagement in policy formulation is not as optimal, which we see that most of the bills which are not.
Okay, let's shift to another question. Tell me, you said that forensic in IPS in a police, forensic has a direct relation. So can you elaborate this statement?
So when we work in labs, we realize that no matter how well we try and run tests, it always depends on how good the evidence collected is. But when we were training the police, Maharashtra police, we realized that there is a mismatch in the kind of forensic science they are exposed to and what is actually needed in the country. So as an IPS officer, I feel that my team or whichever leadership role that I have will ensure that the police is well aware about the forensic science tools and techniques and realizes the importance of good evidence collection and maintaining the chain of control, sir. Chain of custody, I'm sorry. So, sir, even though we might not able to solve every crime with my forensic knowledge, I'll be able to follow good practices and ensure that the police itself follows good practices, which will ultimately help in faster solving of crime and in reducing even backlog of cases, sir.
So can you tell me some application part of forensic science in solving a particular kind of crime in India?
So, for example, in the Nirbhaya case, forensic odontology was used to scientifically prove that one of the convicts was involved in the crime. In odontology, they compared the bite marks of the perpetrator and the bite mark found on the victim's body. So, in this way, even though the person tried to give an alibi, it was scientifically proved that he was involved in the crime. Sir, other than that, even in the Nithari killing cases, the skeletal remains were used to showcase that the murder of the children did take place and the time of the death was also estimated to forensic science.
So recently we have seen that in Myanmar there was a coup. So can you believe that India should intervene and help Myanmar in restoring in democracy there?
Sir, India's approach depends on multiple factors. Firstly, we do have a stake in ensuring that democracy is upheld. So we have given out statements that democracy should be restored. However, so we cannot directly involve ourselves, as you mentioned, because firstly there is a China. We feel that if we, as a nation, if there is animosity between us and the military in Myanmar, we can feel that Myanmar will feel more isolated and closer to China, which works against our interests. Secondly, sir, the Myanmarese military is also helping us in our internal security issues, be it in the insurgency in the northeast as well as the drug menace, and we have conducted many military activities with the military, so we cannot afford to completely generate animosity against the military. And lastly, sir, it is affecting our trade relations with Myanmar as well, because we have many areas in Manipur wherein interstate trade is taking place, which is why I think India's response has been very sharp, that it realizes that it is what is happening is wrong, but it also understands that we cannot go out of the normal norms and completely isolate Myanmar, because it will not only worsen the situation there, but will also hamper our own cause as well. So.
But why, like you said, it is important to fight the insurgency in India? Apart from this, why we are giving so much importance to Myanmar?
So Myanmar, as I mentioned, sir, the China angle is also very important when it comes to Myanmar, because we know of the Sitwe port and how Myanmar can be used through the China-Myanmar economic corridor to completely surround India as well. And this would be catastrophic for India, because Myanmar is a big neighbor that we have, and our Act East policy as well as our eastern areas development depends on our good relations with Myanmar. So I think strategically also it is of very big importance, both domestically and internationally as well.
Thank you, Karisma.
Thank you,
Sir.
Karishma, forensic word has become very nowadays important, relevant, prevalent in all fields of life. Can you tell me something about what is forensic audit?
Yes.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Sir, I can hear you. Karishma, are we audible to you?
I'm sorry.
Hello, Karish. Can you hear me?
Sir, there
Please
is
repeat the
some
question.
network issue at her end because I can hear you very clearly.
Her voice is coming. Can you hear me again, Karishma?
Sir, the voice is breaking a little. Sir,
Now,
yes, sir,
now,
I can hear you, sir. Can you hear me?
okay. Oh, yeah, I can hear you. Let me repeat the question. The forensic word. You can hear me?
Okay.
Yes, sir. She is hearing you. Please complete the question.
Karishma, the forensic word. Now, this word has become a universal. Can you tell me what is forensic? Can you tell me what is forensic audit?
Okay. So, forensic audit has a commercial connotation wherein it is the normal audit that takes place of a company when it is done to showcase any wrongdoing or finding out if a wrongdoing has been done, a fraud has been committed. Then that particular audit is known as forensic audit, wherein the auditing is done in detail to find if there has been any commercial wrongdoings.
Okay. Let me just put you as the district magistrate of a place where the Naxalite population and the Naxal activities are booming. The case study is like this, that in 1913, 1913, 1 rupee was equivalent to $13. In 1947, 1 rupee was equivalent to $1. Now in 2021, 74 or 75 rupees is equal to $1. Economically, are we progressing or are we going down? Our soldiers, troops, paramilitary forces, police, they are not supposed to fight their own citizens. Is it an economic failure, a public administration failure, that within the boundary of the countries, the people are raising not only the voice, but are taking up arms? For what reason? Whether to bring about something fulfillment of their wishes, which is their sort of a political dream, or to see that their economic hardship should be removed, or is it a lack of development? Don't you think the civil service has failed us or the politicians have failed us?
So the Naxalite problem, as you mentioned, is a multi-pronged problem. It cannot be boiled down to one. Firstly, it's an ideological problem which cannot always be won in the battlefield. We have to tackle it ideologically as well, sir. And they do get more and more recruitments because of economic deprivation in the region and governance deficit as well, wherein it becomes a vicious cycle, wherein firstly governance deficit is there, which is why more violence takes place in those areas, which also perpetuates more governance deficit. However, I wouldn't think that administration has failed because we see that over the course of time, the red corridor has been shrunk to a few small belts, be it in Chhattisgarh or in some other states, as compared to how it was when it initially boomed in the 1970s. And now even the government is following a samadhan approach, wherein we realize it's a security issue, it's intelligence issue, as well as we understand that first source of money, weapons, and the weapons are used against the state. So I believe that the state stand is a multi-pronged problem, which is we are also looking at it through a developmental lens and ensuring that such regions are developed through connectivity and such other things.
You were not
Sir,
audible.
you mentioned that one challenge that we
Continue.
yes,
You continue.
it was a top-down approach that was followed, wherein we reliant on the central forces. Whereas we've seen in states like Andhra Pradesh, where when the local people are involved in uh, sir, am I audible now?
Sometimes.
Yes, yes, Karishma, you are audible.
Yes. Sir,
So you continue. I'll fill in the blanks. I will do it myself. Don't worry.
thank you, sir. Yes, so I believe, sir, it is not, while we do have a long way to go until every citizen finds that their grievances are addressed and they don't feel that there is a need to wage a people's war. We do have a long way to go, but we have also been successful in ensuring that the areas are limited. And now we'll have a more dedicated approach to solve the specific grievances that people have in the area, as well as to curb the logistics that people have over there, be it weapons or be it funds that they receive or the ideological backing that they receive from abroad as well as from within the nation.
Suppose you are the district collector, the district magistrate. Now, recently, it has taken place. You are the district magistrate of that district. What will be your approach in totally eliminating the nexus? We understand two, three things. Number one, you have limited resources. The center has already allocated the budget to the state government. The state government in turn has given it to you. On your own, you how much resource mobilization you can undertake, that is your initiative. How much mobilization of public opinion and development of a community ideology, again, that's your initiative. And the police forces that are available to the district that are at your disposal.
So, firstly, my priority would be to always handle law and order issues very strictly. So, the police, I will give them very clear instructions that no one should be, no, any such instance should be. People have to be punished for any law and order problem. Sir, the perception management, how I would try to tackle it is, I would ensure that the district administration is more citizen friendly, wherein there is more interaction with the tribal population. I will try and ensure that people who understand the language are also working in the administration, so that we can have a more people to people connect when people understand the language. And uh, I think every week we could have like a citizen engagement wherein we understand what is the ideological problems that the Naxals are spreading amongst people, and we'll try to counter it with our own narrative. And sir, secondly, all the schemes that are being followed for this region, I would ensure that it is completely followed and it is implemented in letter and spirit, because governance deficit should never be a problem that people face. And even if it creates a security even if there is a threat perception amongst our own staff, I will ensure that enough security is given to my staff. They are motivated enough to understand that their governance problem is what is becoming a law and order problem. So motivation of my staff, engaging with the citizens, especially leaders of these tribal groups. If we can ensure that they are in our good relations with us, I think it will create a more multiplier effect. And sir, ensuring that there is no corruption in the system and people see that the governance setup is working for them and not against them. So these are the three things that I would try to tackle in perception management.
Do you face any problem being from Kerala? There is something called Sons of Soil in Maharashtra. Is it from the point of view of governance, administration, or from welfare, or in a democracy? Is it a valid sort of a perception? Now, Haryana has also come out that the locals should be given the preference or the reservation even in the private sector. Or will it be physioperious tendencies which can lead to very disastrous effects subsequently?
Sir, extreme regionalism is what causes the sense of son of soil tendency, and there is a sense of relative deprivation that people from a particular locality feel when people from other states are seen to get opportunities. So, sir, as a solution, I believe we should ensure that the pie itself is enlarged instead of cutting the pie differently so that only people from one particular state develop. Because after all, in a federal setup, we need to ensure that unity of India is maintained, and we do have the right to residence and to profession anywhere in the country. And so, coming to local reservation for local people, sir, in the long run, it has a negative impact on the state itself, because many companies find this policy to be regressive, and they feel that the quality of workforce that they get because of such restrictions will affect their functioning as well. A better solution would be to cater to the problem, which is the education deficit that people have and the skill deficit that people have. So instead of reserving jobs for sons of soil, we should ensure that training programs are reserved for such people, so that every state ensures that their people are competent enough to compete with people from outside as well. So this will create a more competitive federalism than the present sentiment oriented solutions. So
Any feedback you have that the National Skill Mission has been able to provide the type of skill development and the training that the industries, medium or the large, or the heavy industries, or the advanced techno industries, they are taking these national skill mission developed candidates.
So we started the National Skill Mission in 2015 because we realized that in India we have around only 4% of our population as skilled. So we understood that there is a clear challenge, which is why uh, the government tried to ensure that there is more industry input in the skilling, and there is a more PPP model wherein industries are also encouraged to take part in the skilling mission. However, sir, there is still the challenge that exists of tracking of the employability of the individuals who come out of this skill mission, because even though they are given skills, there is no data as to how their career is progressing and how the skilling is beneficial, and skilling is seen as a one time event. However, now we are seeing that we need a skilling revolution wherein skilling should be a continuous process, because skills are getting obsolete very easily, which is why the solution would be like how the World Economic Forum talks about a reskilling fund should be set up, so that even persons who have been skilled once are not left alone to fend for themselves. There is proper data and evidence based policy wherein we realize that these are the challenges that they are facing in real time, and this is the kind of skilling that they will need throughout their professional lives. So even Niti Ayog had mentioned a concept of skill vouchers, wherein instead of just giving them one skill development, if we give vouchers to people which they can utilize throughout their career, so that they realize that this is now when I need to get more skilled to progress in my career, and they should be given the choice to utilize it in the future. So I believe, sir, there are much more innovations that are needed to ensure that more of our people are skilled and more of our people are upbeat with the skilling that is needed in the new era of fourth industrial revolution. Sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Samar. Samar, you can take over.
Karishma, I was just listening to your answer. I was just listening to your answer on Naxalism, what sir asked, and you talked about a few of the local models. You have also participated in Speak for India. You have also worked for parliamentarians. So you are a public administration student as well, right?
Yes, sir.
So I believe you know about principle of subsidiarity,
Yes, sir.
right? And the basic idea behind everything that is local should be encouraged is that because people understand what is the local need,
Yes, sir.
right? That is the idea behind promoting the local.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
So someone who has lived in an area knows more about that area.
Yes, sir.
Karishma, I see most only.
I'm sorry, sir. Can
Whereas
you?
your first option of service choice is Kerala. Yeah. I'll repeat it. I'm saying that most of the time of your life you have lived in Maharashtra. So you
Yes.
are more aware about the problem what Maharashtra is facing, your local area is facing. Whereas when it comes to service, the first preference given by you is Kerala. Don't you
Yes.
think whatever you have learned, whatever you have learned about participation of locals, you are yourself defying it by running away from Maharashtra to Kerala?
Um, Sir, I believe the role of an administrator is to develop the local people to take the form of as you mentioned that subsidiarity in administration would not mean that only people from one particular state work in an administration there. In all India service, I believe the training given is such that we will understand the problems of any given district and ensure that we enhance participation with people, so subsidiarity comes from the local people who are living there. Even sir, even if I've given Kerala as my first option and I have not stayed in Kerala, but sir, I do understand the problems that Kerala faces because I do visit the area every time. And I think for administration, you need a different skill set, which I believe we are trained to understand, and that will what will come over the course of my career. And I don't think that it is running away from Maharashtra, but it is more of like trying to solve problems that any region, wherever I get the opportunity to work, I will ensure that I will work with the people and use whatever skills that I have garnered over the course of my career to better utilize the resources of the area and to solve the core problems of the regions.
Okay. Karishma, my last question to you. I see you have a good amount of involvement in forensic science.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so just tell me, how can forensic science be used for women empowerment?
So for women's safety specifically, I think forensic science will be a game changer because right now, if a criminologist had conducted a study of convicted rapists, and they figured out that the main reason why people commit crimes against women is they don't believe that they will be caught. And in forensic science, we use proper scientific evidence to ensure that every crime is solved without any doubt. So if we use forensic science, the this conception that people have that they can walk scot free even after committing a crime against a woman would we can subside this narrative, and there will be a surety of getting caught, and criminal justice system will also become improved because everything is scientific based, and conviction rate will also improve with this. So forensic science uh, uh, tackles the major problem that women empowerment faces, which is women's safety. And I believe that a push for forensic science will definitely be a push for women empowerment as well.